You are welcome to the November 2019 edition of the Nextier Power Dialogue. My name is Valentine Achum, and I have the honor and privilege, to do you this welcome. The Nextier Power Dialogue is an agenda-setting platform. It's a monthly public discourse that creates a platform to share insightful notions and advocate for policies and suggest pragmatic solutions that continuously improve the Nigerian power sector. This month's edition, the theme of this month's edition is on emerging electricity regulations, catalysts for market competition, dealing on distribution franchising and competition transition charge. The objective for this month's edition, within the next 2 hours, we shall be dealing on implementation model of the distribution franchising regulation. We shall discuss the expeditious licensing of eligible customers and competition transition charge compensation, including, of course, market challenges, while we'll be recommending solutions and strategies. Within the next 2 hours, we shall enumerate and discuss associated risks with the implementation of these regulations, that is the distribution franchising and eligible customer regulation, including mitigation strategies. We shall also discuss and enumerate precedent and enabling factors to the successful implementation of these regulations. At this juncture, it's my honor and privilege to introduce the moderator. He's a professional planner and power specialist. His career, which has cut across a number of public institutions, started in 2002 with the Bureau of Public Enterprises as secretary of the then Power Sector Reform Team. The team developed and implemented the Electricity Power Sector Reform Program. He was seconded to NERC to assist with the takeoff of the commission, and with the successes recorded in the reform of the power sector, he was engaged by the NNPC to support the special advisor to the president on petroleum matters on the reform of oil and gas. He also supported the establishment of EMS, now NEMSA, and have supported the development of renewable energy projects. He joined CPCS Transcom in 2015 to coordinate the transaction of the NIPP generation, transmission, distribution, and gas assets, a role he performed in 2019. Lastly, he holds a master's in energy and environmental management, a PGD in sustainable development, PGD in business administration, and bachelor's in urban and regional planning. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to have Mr. Chijioke Okonkwo to be our moderator for today. A round of applause for him, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to moderate this session today. I believe we are going to have an exciting evening discussing the consultative papers that have been put out by the regulator NERC, to further help develop the sector. Without much ado, I would like to invite the panelists that will be joining us to have a very fruitful conversation today. And starting with the lady on the team, Mrs. Rahila Thomas. She's the director of EMRC, that is Energy Market and Regulatory Consultants, with over 16 years professional experience in the power sector, and leads the EMRC team in West Africa. She has an unrivaling knowledge of all aspects of the Nigerian power sector. Rahila provided ongoing support to distribution companies in the Nigerian power sector. She has led cost of service and tariff studies for 9 of the 11 distribution companies. She is currently managing energy demand studies to support 3 distribution companies in developing their approach to electrification. Rahila has led on the development and delivery of a number of our training courses for distribution companies, including loss reduction strategies. She previously worked for the Presidential Task Force on Power and held advisory positions to the Minister of the Power Sector, several ministers of the power sector. She was also a core member of the Bureau of Public Enterprises Electric Power Sector Reform Team, driving the Nigerian Power Sector Reform Program. Please, ladies and gentlemen, could we put our hands together for my friend, Rahela Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next on the panel is Mr. Maurice Smith. Maurice Smith has been a power consultant for the past 30 years and has been in Nigeria for 10 of those years. On customer competition, he has worked both sides, starting with Scottish Hydroelectric in 1992, where he worked to promote competition in England to gain new customers, and also to prevent or limit competition in Scotland so as to protect their distribution business. He was successful in both. Please, ladies and gentlemen, could we put our hands together again for my friend and work colleague, Maurice Smith. And the last of the panelists is none other but Mr. Edu Okeke, the managing director of the group flagship asset, the 461 megawatts Azura Edo IPP. A seasoned director and manager with 25 years experience in heavy capital-intensive industries. Edu started his career with Guinness Breweries in 1995, my brand, in the engineering division. He then joined Schlumberger in 1996 as a field engineer in its drilling and measurement division. During this time, he had assignments in Nigeria, US, UK, Vietnam, and Pakistan. Edu then became the power generation product sales director for Sub-Saharan Africa for GE Power and Water, after previously holding the position of West Africa regional manager for GE Energy Business. Prior to GE, Edu also worked with Lafarge Cement, where he served as the strategy manager for the South African operations, as well as commercial director for the Nigeria WAPCO unit. Edu holds an MBA in management from the Imperial College, University of London. We have a lot in common. And a Bachelor of Engineering degree in Electronics Engineering from the University of Nigeria in Nsukka. Please help me welcome another great lion, Edu Okeke. Welcome. Please let me recognize every distinguished member that has honored this invitation to be a part of this forum today. We do not take it for granted. We that have basically spent quite a number of our time trying to resolve the power sector challenges, believing that solving the Nigeria power problems will put us on the path to development, do not take it for granted when we gather to exchange ideas and build on what we currently have to see whether we can put ourselves on that path to grow. I'd like to recognize the presence of the representative of the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, since we'll be discussing their policy document that is still at its consultative stage and what they have done with some of the regulations that they have also put out there today. Mr. Mahmoud Zubairu, the DGM Legal and Licensing Division of NEC.
Sorry, thank you very much. He has been my colleague for several years, but he has forgotten my name. I'm Ahmad Zubairu. Okay,
I'm sorry. Please forgive me.
Okay.
Okay. Recently, or in April, the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission put out 2 consultative papers on the competition transition charge regulation and the discos franchising regulation to help support the recently initiated or being implemented eligible customer regulation. And it's been receiving quite a lot of attention. Prior to we just starting this meeting, we also informed that the Commission has undertaken consultative forums across the 6 geopolitical zones across the country, have published the regulation in papers, and have received feedback too. This is an opportunity for us to actually dissect those 2 regulations, find out how it would impact on the eligible customer regulation, and how it would generally also affect the current dwindling state of our Nigerian power sector. If it is going to put our market, electricity market, on the path to recovery, then it's something that NEC would love to really take away from this conversation. So without much ado, I'd like to start with the lady, Mrs. Rahila Thomas, to give us an overview of what you think with respect to the implementation model of the distribution franchising regulation.
Well, with the distribution franchising regulation, it's essentially a model that creates a platform for the development of different business models to attract third-party investments. That's essentially what a franchising does. Now, the whole idea behind the regulation is to help facilitate this development. Now, if you take a closer look at other regulations that have come to pass, so you look at the IEDN regulation, for example, the Independent Electricity Distribution of Nigeria regulation. If you look at embedded generation, if you look at mini-grid regulation, even MAP, which was recently published or issued, you will see that you really don't need the distribution franchising regulation. You can more or less, a distribution company could carry on doing business, farming out a demarcated area in their network for a third party to come in and run it. So you can farm out functions, you can farm out areas that can be along state boundaries or feeders. So you could actually do that, and there are examples on ground for that. You have different models going on in Kaduna, for example, where they identify certain feeders, and the private sector is looking at is doing the metering, the billing, and the collection. You have a similar project called the 3D Sokoto project within the Kaduna distribution network, also looking at that already. You have, the geometric, which was, using the IDN model, which again is a form of franchising. So in my personal opinion, I do not think that the regulation brings in additional incentive, but I think it creates more hurdles to making it successful. I guess we'll have a conversation around those hurdles later, but that is my general view about it.
No, that's a good one. Thank you very much. Mr. Edu, how would the competition transition charge compensation enable the implementation of the eligible customer regulation? I will most appreciate an overview of if you could please help us with an overview of the competition transition charge regulation.
Thank you, Chijoke. First, I'm going to go rogue on this first. Our position, or my position, is that whether you start with the CTC charge regulation or the franchising or the eligible customer, what the regulator is doing is to get a child that has not crawled to run a marathon. We do not support those regulations because we think that the industry is not ready for those regulations. Rather, we should not be talking about, in fact, it's more like meddling. I look at it more as meddling with the market. We should allow the market to function in the first instance before you start thinking of those. So, what NERC has been doing with these regulations is simply to be seen to do something, because we understand that the market as we have it today has basically failed. Rather than now going back to basic to say what caused the failure of the market, we are thinking that more regulation is only going to solve the problem, but it's not. You are just creating more hurdles, scaring away investors. The genesis of the whole problem we have in Nigeria is what happened in 2015-2016, where the consumer retail tariff for the industry went from 15 US cents to 8 US cents. Till today, that's where it is. That is the genesis of the problem. And what did DISCOs do? The DISCOs, of course, scaled back, because let's understand, power is a dollar commodity. So when the retail tariff went from 15 US cents to 8 US cents, we did nothing. But rather than taking the market where it should be, we are now beginning to bring up all these regulations. How can you create a franchising market and say, or create eligible customer? When the disco that has that area, you have not allowed them to charge the market rate. How is it going to work? So to me, we have to go back to basic.
Yeah.
We have to, if you go back there, then what are you going to do? You now take the tariff where it should be, or you allow the discos to run their franchise areas. And the way it's designed in the act is that with time, things will actually discos, if everybody is charging their customers, market cost-reflective tariff, then discos will have their investment plan. And then they can say, this area, I am ready to invest in this area to bring them up to a certain standard, but I don't have limited fund, So I have these areas. Anybody can come in and then take those areas and then try to serve them.
Yeah.
But you can't do that when you are the mother of the whole thing, which is the disco. I mean, as long as the value chain is failing, that's why most of these things, people are talking and talking and talking, but you don't have new money coming in because nobody is going to invest as long as the regulator keeps meddling with the market.
So we are indirectly almost about to kill the distribution business.
That's exactly what, unless the regulator can tell us that that's their mission, which is to kill the discos. If that's the plan we have, to kill the discos, then all these regulations, they are fantastic. But as long as we want the market to work, let's understand one thing. I mean, I run a Genco, but if the distribution business dies, all of us will die because they are the basis for the whole market to function.
Some would have a different opinion on that as it is, considering that the discos are the ones that would initiate that process of implementing the competition transition charge. I mean, they're the ones that will basically benefit since most of those specific customers that will sign up to eligibility would be using their network in the first place. And indirectly, it's another way of getting funds back from whoever the off-taker is, for that investment that has been made, as much as they may be in a position to pay the distribution use of systems.
Well, like I said again, some of these policies on paper, they look fantastic. Why is there nobody doing it today? You cannot invest and make money based on the tariff you have out there. So the discos, of course, they will call. I mean, if the regulator is bringing out a policy, you as the disco, you don't have a choice. You say, yeah, I'm supporting, but let's see the whole thing kick off. Because you need either from the disco or from the franchisees to invest. But you cannot go and invest when you've not allowed the discos to increase their tariff, but you are now saying that the franchisees should charge the customer what they are willing to pay. What will happen is that the franchisees are going to pick the good customers. But that's not actually what the regulation should be helping us do. The regulation should be helping to go to areas that are not served at all. NERC claims that this is supposed to be for underserved market, but I believe every Nigerian is underserved. So where is he going to?
Okay. Please, let's understand this from the link between the generation and the distribution, from the transmission's perspective, and also from your international experience. Mr. Morris, what would be the successful implementation of these regulations, or what would the successful implementation of these regulations translate to across the value chain?
Okay. Firstly, as you say, Chijioke, I'm going to talk a bit from the international experience. And being a consultant, much more about how to do things than whether to do them is right or wrong. Chijioke mentioned my early experience on this, where I worked both sides of the fence. That was for Scottish Hydroelectric. And when we did the privatisation in England and Wales and Scotland, the actual legal structure in Scotland of the Act was different to England and Wales. And Scottish Hydroelectric took advantage of that. And basically, what I helped do for them was to ensure that on their home-based disco, we used administrative difficulty to make it practically impossible for customers to change. At the same time, down in England, we were arguing to streamline every single process to make it easy for customers to change. Now, why I talk about that here, you all know that here in Nigeria, our processes are all difficult. So customer change is not an easy thing. Right. In terms of the CTC consultation, my view, and particularly in terms of my reading of the Act long ago and again, I still think that CTC is about one aspect. There are two aspects here, and the consultation deals with both of them. One is distribution use of system. This is charging for use of the distribution wires. This is a permanent charge, right? It covers asset usage and distribution losses, right? The second aspect is dealing with the supply business shock, suddenly taking these customers away from the disco as a supply business, not a wires business, puts them in negative land financially, right? So what's happened in other countries is, yes, you've had a transition charge, and it's been about 3 to 5 years, normally dropping down, and linked to it has been change in the tariff regulation to match up, right? Now, certainly when I read the Act, I only saw CTC as being the second half. I thought distribution use of system was completely taken for granted because every other country that's done some sort of privatization like this has put distribution use of system in place. So that's one point. The other point, given my history here, I've been looking at advising on the eligible customer stuff here. And you have to think about it. If you're a disco and these large customers are not paying or are not up to date with their payments, you're not going to allow them to transfer. And you're right in that. They owe you money. Okay? So quite naturally, if you're a disco, you won't fight too hard to get them to pay their bills promptly. You'll let them lag a little bit. And the whole issue when we, 3 years ago, there was the tariff increase, right? So, a large customer went from sort of 35 naira to 45 naira, varying across the country. Now, lots of these large customers just refused to pay the increase. They've been paying the 35, but this means those discos now have a paper debt, whether it's real or not, that they can use to hold on to those customers. If you go to the other side of the fence and you imagine yourself coming in as a competitive supply business, whether with a generator behind you or not, do you want to take on customers with a massive debt? They're not paying. Why? What do you want them? Normally a supply business is a tight margin business. Yeah, the generator behind you will give you a bit of leeway, but only so much. So pragmatically, this whole area is, to me, little more than paperwork. In terms of the franchising, I've little international experience of this, and when I've experienced it, it has largely been about areas of the network that aren't well served, bringing local generation in, that sort of thing. It's not about the fact that disco can't bill the customers, because billing the customers is one of the, well, to me, it's the disco's #1 duty as a financial entity. Mm-hmm. Building new wires and everything, even though I'm an engineer, that is secondary. Get the customers to pay. Anyway, cheers.
Okay. Before we get into the meat of this conversation, please would like to hear from the Regulatory Commission's rep as to how well the eligible customer regulation has fared so far.
Well, thank you very much, Chijoke. Once again, I thank you for inviting me, though it was my boss that was supposed to be here, so he asked me to represent him. Although he asked me to represent him, so I'm not fully prepared, but don't expect to get all the answers from him. Before I start that, let me give you a background. This power issue that we are discussing here, let me start. I've had the privilege of working in the utility and now on the regulator side. So
Yeah.
I have a little bit of both over the years. One of the objectives of NEC, let me just take one as provided in the Act, is to increase access to electricity. I remember very well, after my school, university, in the late 80s, I served in NEPA. That's from where I joined. My boss then used to carry me to a meeting, board meeting. The issues that they used to discuss at that time, late 80s, is the same issues that we are discussing here for how many years? Over 20. My son recently got an admission to read electrical engineering. I was telling him, I hope by the time you finish and you come into the power sector, you hear the problems, you won't say, Daddy, what have you people solved when you were there for 30-something years? I said, I will just tell him that I just managed to get money to pay for your school fees. Read electrical engineering. Don't come and solve the problem. Honestly, because the issue has been lingering for all this while. I'm now approaching retirement. So like I said, one of the objectives of NEC is to increase access.
Yes.
We know most of citizens in this country don't have access to electricity. What do we do to increase this access? Rahila have just mentioned. NEC has come up with the embedded generation a couple of years back, the IEDM, all in an effort to see that access increased so that we get new connections. Couple of issues, funding, tariff issue, it was not very successful. We move ahead. Eligible customer was introduced in 2017. As we are talking today, I think there's no clear eligible customer. We're about registering just 2 maybe in the next few weeks. The ones we have done for Osiomo and in Lagos, Sura Market, I wouldn't like to call that a clear eligible customer transaction. So, all in an effort to see that we increase access. Rahila mentioned, we have also the mini-grid. We say, okay, let us see whether mini-grid can work. We have passed the regulation, mini-grid. The government has intervened through REA, trying to encourage investors.
Yeah.
All towards seeing that we increase access. Now, we say, okay, let us explore franchising. My friend here is saying, no need for that regulation. Franchising, you know, these costs are not, they don't want to go to areas that is unserved.
Yeah.
Even underserved, they don't want to go and invest there. Talk less of unserved areas. How do we reach these locations? You say, okay, let us try franchising again. You know, if somebody is sick, if there's medicine, anytime somebody will tell you, use this, it will cure you. Use this, it will cure you. You have to just try all avenues. It's true. To see that that's what we're facing. So we say, okay, franchising. Franchising, the franchisee, they are going to write on the license of the distribution companies. It is, we know they are allowed. Their license terms and conditions say you can outsource. It's a general statement.
Yeah.
But, sorry, sir, you can outsource.
Yeah.
But then, there has to be framework. There has to be real framework if you want to outsource, if you want somebody to do this. It's not that we're issuing license to the franchisee, or no. It's still they are using the distribution license that we have given to distribution companies. It is based on that license that they operate the franchise. So the regulation is how to operate under the distribution license, to go to the areas that are unserved or underserved. Because we know as it is today, these costs are not investing. Even in the city, in Abuja here, go within the city, Asokoro, you find that these costs, they don't want to invest. And customer number still expanding. So that's the issue. And again, if I'm getting cheaper power, why would I want to be an eligible customer? I know power from the grid will be cheaper for me. Why should I want to go and pay more to be an eligible customer? After paying through the PPA, then go again and be paying CTC, posting LC. Why? If there's reliable power supply, nobody will want to be an eligible customer. Thank you.
That I see is what we should actually be working towards achieving. And to a very large extent, I believe that we can achieve that if we have cost-reflective tariff in place. However, it has to be cost-reflective tariff that the consumers would also be in a position to pay for. Having said that, please, I'd like to throw this question to Mrs. Thomas, that the proposed distribution franchising regulation assumes that the distribution firms lack the capacity to perform at contracted levels. Is the current proposed model the most suitable, sustainable solution to improving distribution efficiency now?
Okay, let me start with make some comments on the eligible customer regulation. I found it quite interesting that Edu, as a GENCO, was speaking against the regulation, because when eligible customers regulation was issued, all GENCOs were so happy about it, and the whole idea behind the eligible customers regulation was that it was going to solve the liquidity problem. So, so everyone was saying, you know, let's go for it. Yes, the discos are unserious. They are rejecting energy. So if they are rejecting, then let's take this power and give it to people that can pay for it. Now, another thing around the eligible customers regulation is that it was essentially issued, and what the regulation says is that it's to introduce retail competition and also to give customers full choice, options. Now, that can only happen in the market where supply outstrips demand or even matches it. Your demand and supply would match, or your supply is above demand. Then you have competition, then you have choice. Then that pushes down the unit price of that commodity. And today, electricity is a commodity. That's what it is. A lot of people look at the engineering aspect of it, but the problem we're having in the sector today is around the commercials. Yeah. If you look at all the regulation, as he indicated, and I said earlier, mini grids, you know, MAP, IDN, if you look at it, what has been the success rate? How many IDNs do you see today in the market? None. I mean, if you have two that have been issued licenses, they are not in operation. So all that, it boils down to the economics of these models. So eligible customer in itself is not a bad regulation. It's just that it came at the wrong time in the market stage of electricity development. Yeah. Now, let's look at the numbers before I get down to distribution, franchising. If you are saying that, so let's look at the tariff regime. Let me put some numbers in there so that it can get us thinking. If on a yearly basis, looking at the MITO, the yearly billed energy by a distribution business is about 108 billion naira. Now, 55 billion of that amount is energy billed that would go to generation companies. So that is their component of the 108 billed energy. 55 billion goes to the generators. Now, if we assume that eligible customer regulation goes fully live, the question to ask is that what's the percentage of potential eligible customers of that billed energy? Now, when we did the analysis, the MD customers, all MD customers who can be potential, because that if you go everywhere talking about eligible customers, yeah, the focus is on MD customers. Yeah. Now, we asked the question, what is the percentage of MD customers if you were to go full life as eligible customers? It's only 36% of the energy billed. 36%. Now, 36% of 55 billion that goes to generators in monetary terms is 20 billion naira. So if we were to say that eligible customers go live, Gencos pay, sell your power to these MD customers. The ceiling for them is 20 billion naira. Whereas it's supposed to collect 55 billion. So it's 20 billion. So now let's move from there and go into the issue of reliability. Out of these MD customers representing 36% and 20 billion revenue, how much of that is reliable? How much of that can generators bank on a monthly basis? Due to the shortcomings of the network today can only allow 8% of those customers to get the power as at when, maybe 95% power availability. Only 8% out of the 36% is reliable. Now, what does 8% constitute in monetary terms? That's 4.2 billion naira. So, if you sit back and look at it as a generator, you say to yourself, what the revenue I can really bank on without issues, and this is from the industrial customers connected at 33 kV on the transmission side. Those ones, for sure, they get their power and they pay. So we're talking about a yearly average, confirmed or reliable cash flow of 4.2 billion. Now today, if you look at what the distribution companies are paying, they are paying that. They are paying 4.2 billion. More than that, if you look at the percentage. So if you sit back as a generator and government and everybody that is pushing for eligible customers, and you say to yourself, what am I chasing? Why am I putting so much effort in these eligible customers when all I can guarantee is 4.2 billion? That's 8%. Why are we not chasing 92% that is missing? Now, in my view, eligible customers is just a waste of time because it can't function in this market. We do not have the capacity in terms of generation to make it happen. So when you talk about full choice, if you talk about ability to choose your suppliers, we don't have that choice. It's just cherry picking. Then you now are in breach of the act that talks about not discriminating amongst customers. The regulator represented here would agree to that. So eligible customers regulation in itself is not a bad regulation, but the economics, the network doesn't even allow it. If you even look at balancing market, so if I as a generator said I'm going to give you, the eligible customer, 100 megawatts every day, will the network allow that? The answer is no. In a normal market, you have what you call a pool market that you can go for contracts for difference. And what that simply means is that if I guarantee you 100 megawatts, I can only give you 80 megawatts, I can go to a market and take 20 megawatts at premium and fill up that gap. Yep. We don't have that kind of arrangement today in Nigeria, and it's a long time getting there. If you even hear what Maurice was speaking earlier, we are not nowhere there. So that brings me down to the distribution franchising as the most reasonable approach. Now, in terms of the regulation, I think it's unnecessary because the distribution franchising regulation as drafted today creates more problems. So just leave it. Let's work with the regulations we have. In fact, even the supplementary tariff order allows a disco to import power to meet the supply gap. IDN allows you to demarcate part of your network and embed power. MAP that has come allows you to get MAP people to provide the metering, take over your metering and billing and collection function. So it's a mix of all these things. So really, the distribution franchising regulation today creates hurdles. One of the greatest hurdles is around bankability, securitization. If we all agree that the essence of franchising is to attract third-party investment, then it is critical that the commercials are in such a way that an investor is comfortable to come and put their money, and they are sure that they will get their money back. Now, the regulation says that, one of the issues in regulation, it says that the franchisee cannot own the assets. I mean, how is that even possible? How can you, as a franchisee, want to put in billions and you don't own the assets? and the regulation talks about some project agreement. What does that mean? We're talking about billions, and let me put that in context, in numbers. From our experience as consultants, we're advising some power developer in trying to carve out some area in a distribution business. Now, for you to invest in a typical feeder, 11 kV feeder with its associated 415 kV network, you will need to do three things. One, you need to do loss reduction. Loss reduction includes enumeration and metering. And when we talk about metering, you're talking about high-tech technology, everything automated, everything, you know. Everything. You're able to see everything by technology. Smart grid, smart network. That's what we're talking about. Now, for you to do that, for a typical feeder, you need to invest about 500 million naira. One feeder. You add that, you need to do network investment plan. What does that require? Rehabilitation of a typical feeder. You rehabilitate it, you extend, you reinforce, and do all that. You need about 400 million naira. If you want to cover the gap on a typical feeder in terms of supply, that's you import power, you need another roughly average 350 million. So if you add that up, in a typical feeder, we're talking about 1.3 billion naira of investment for one feeder. Now, let's do the calculation. In a typical disco, you have about 200 feeders. 200 feeders in a typical disco. If you multiply that, then we're talking about over 200 billion. We're talking about over 5 years, 50 billion naira yearly investment to achieve those three things I talked about. 50 billion. But today, what does the regulator allow? The regulator only allows an average of 8 billion. 8 billion. We're talking about 50 billion. Now, if you are saying that what I'm talking about is just, maybe I'm pulling out numbers, let's look at a typical example, Tata. Everybody knows Tata Power. Everybody knows about the India model. Everywhere we turn, we talk about India. Tata Power took over a utility in New Delhi that is, if you compare it to Ikeja Disco, that area is half of Ikeja Disco. Ikeja Disco is about 12,000 square kilometers. What the area Tata took over is just over 500. Now, it took Tata $1 billion, north of $1 billion, to bring down ATC&C levels at 53% down to a single digit, under 10%. Over how many period? Over how many years? 17 years. 17 years of $1 billion, over $1 billion US investment. And it took them 17 years to bring down 53%, where we are today, and where we were 5 years ago, to a single digit. If you do a straight line on using 17 years, that's 21 billion naira equivalent. 21 billion. So if you look at that number and the 50 billion, they're not far apart. It's just the number of years, and it becomes more focused when you look at each disco. Now, that in itself, when you look at tariffs, and the regulation is saying, oh well, as a franchisee, when you come, you must be subject to the tariffs of MITO. It kills it. It completely kills it. If we're saying that MITO is giving me only 8 billion, and in reality I need about 21 to 50 billion every year, then we're not even scratching it. So, I mean, I guess I've spoken too much, but the point here is,
The points of
it's for me, distribution franchising is the way to go, but we don't need this sort of regulation that we have today. Distribution franchising should be allowed to be explored in different models. There are different ways. I mean, if a disco pieces off is networked by different customer categories, so you have manageable, non-manageable, you determine as a disco how should I support every of my customers. For some customers in a distribution company where you have 25% of your customers only paying 4 naira, why do I want to give them smart meters? Why do I want them on a transmission transformer that they can never pay for at 4 naira per kilowatt? And their load is so little. So a distribution business can decide and say, you know what, you customers, I will give you solar home systems. I take you off the network, issue you solar home systems, work with REA, Ministry of Power, and provide this, the required subsidies to that. So I think, for me, that is the approach we need to get to. And I kind of align with what Edu was saying earlier about overregulation.
Yes.
I think the market there's just so much regulation. And as he said earlier, he said, if you are sick, you try everything. But I don't think that is what will take us where we are going. We can't be trying everything, because in trying everything, you are discouraging investment, discouraging people. You are showing that you don't know what you're doing. And today in Nigeria, in this sector, there's no leadership, I'm sorry to say. There's lack of coordination. Everybody has different ways of viewing what is happening, but let me not go there. So that's it. Thank you.
Let's not go there. Good point. Good point. Edu, she says that you differ. What are your thoughts on the same question?
Well, thank you. Honestly, I so much agree with Lahia most of the things, because, like I said at the beginning, we are over-regulating. We actually don't have a market, because when we say market, we don't have a market. Rather than trying to create a market, we are busy introducing regulation after regulation. Let's use the embedded power regulation. Why didn't it work? All the discos, all of them thought they were going to rush into it. They got investors to come and give them numbers. There was no single embedded generation that was going to give them anything lower than what they were buying power from embed. And that was it. It didn't make sense. The cost of power was higher than their retail tariff. So let's look at the industry. I mean, if you take away the NDPSC projects that Nigeria, that's Nigeria just putting out money there.
Yeah.
There is no private sector investment in the sector except Azura. And I tell you, people talk about Azura. Azura came in 2016. We got to financial close in 2016 because everybody, or most people in the industry, felt there was a path. In 2012, 2013, we increased our tariff by 250%. So we got our tariff to a level that was commensurate with our peers in West Africa.
Yeah.
Today we have the cheapest tariff in West Africa. Yeah. You understand that kind of thing? And then what have we done? When the Naira collapsed, we devalued. Rather than taking the tariff back to where it should be, we now started attacking the discos. Look, I don't own a disco, like I said, but that is not the solution. The solution to the industry is not all these regulations. It's not about wires and cables and everything. It's a commercial problem. We are not trying to solve it at all. You understand?
Yeah.
So I still believe that we have to, and sorry if I sound like this core capitalist and that kind of thing, but when you have a scarce commodity, you don't regulate. You auction it. So today in Nigeria, there are people that are receiving 23 hours power, but there are people that are getting probably 1 hour in 6 days. They are paying the same thing. That's not right. When everybody in Nigeria looks at, the only thing we talk about is telecom, GSM. When MTN and Econet came into Nigeria, if you had told them to roll out in Nigeria at a given tariff, they would have packed up their bags and left this country. But what did they do? People bought SIM card in this country for 50,000 naira. That's how they started. And it was Lagos, Port Harcourt, Kano, Kaduna, Abuja. And then as they were making money, and you saw how they were promoting it then. They will tell you, Casina, be ready, we are coming in 6 months. Because they have their business model. They know how the investment they're going to make, how they're going to roll out. And that's what we need to go back to. For the power sector, what you need to do is to tell the discos, it's very simple. Go and charge your customers what they are willing to pay. That's the reality. As a country, we can't be this big brother. Yes, I understand that power is a social commodity, but you have to tell the discos, go and charge your customers what they are willing to pay. NERC, as the regulator, the only regulation you need there is to say, first of all, you have to meter those customers for you to accurately capture what they are taking.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is, if you make a promise that you're going to give them, say, 20 hours, you have to live by it. If not, you have to have a compensation mechanism. If you do that, all of a sudden, let me use Abuja Disco. Abuja Disco will now look around and say, okay, my Tama, based on the feeders and my substations, I can give my Tama 22 hours today. So my Tama people, I will charge you 100 naira per kilowatt hour. Very simple. But we say, based on the infrastructure I have today, I can only give you 10 hours. So maybe I will charge you 80 naira. But Walada, you guys should just wait. For now, I'm not ready for you. Based on my based on the money I have, based on my investment profile, you guys should wait for 2 years. That's when I'm going to come to you. Then, and on a monthly basis, because this thing works, you now have to sit down with TCN and say, TCN, I promised Wuse people that next month I'm going to give them 24 hours, or definitely we can't do 24 hours, but you can say, I'm going to give you 20 hours. So, TCN, what investment do you need to do to make sure you supply me the power? You've done your enumeration, and you keep rolling it out, and that's how you go. There is no way Nigeria will electrify the whole country. Unfortunately, let's understand something. The highest growth in the electricity market in the world is China, and they grew by 17% per annum for a whole number of years. And all of a sudden, we are doing 4,000. People will say we can do 20,000, we cannot. Let's understand that we probably grow at 10%, so 4,000, 4,400. And unfortunately, I feel that we are going back, except Azura that brought in 461 megawatts. If the government is not investing, there is no private sector money that is coming into the sector. And I tell you that the way we are actually going, sometimes I listen to people and they say, oh, we are never going to do Azura. And I laugh. I say, the reality is that investors will not even do another Azura today. Investors, based on where we are, whether equity holders or lenders, if they want to do that, they will actually ask for more credit enhancement than what was given to Azura. Because we have not moved at all. So let's just go back. The reality, just like what Rahel said, there are some people, we just have to, as a country, accept that not everybody will have grid power. There are some people you just look at and you say, sorry, just get solar home systems. Get Azuri, get Train Solar. Just give them solar home systems. Let them just be there. Because we cannot invest for them. And then you see people, you say, I am going to invest, but you have to pay for it. We are simply subsidizing the rich, who are some people who are getting the power today. The people that are not getting the power are subsidizing them. But rather than the regulator looking at these things and say, let's allow the market to function. And the reality, like what I said again, if you now invest as a disco and give my tama and you're charging the 100 naira, that's when you start. That's also when the disco can now have their investment plan over a number of years. And then this franchising we are coming out will come in naturally, because somebody will say, disco, I've looked at it. These Gwagwalada people, you told them 5 years. But I have some money. I can actually give them this power in 2 years. Please allow me to go and serve Gwagwalada. We'll sign an agreement, because the disco is not ready today to give them. That's the way it works. And then it also now plan, as you're doing it, you're also talking to TCN and looking at the Gencos and saying, what capacity is coming in on a yearly basis to make sure that I can satisfy that market. But this is more like the basic thing. We keep, rather than regulator thinking of it, we keep saying, within that small pot, how do we keep inserting more knives of regulation and regulation and the discos are just looking. The discos, the reality today is that none of them can invest anything. All these things, they can't even meet my tama. That's the reality. They don't have the money. We all have to accept that the discos don't have the money. The tariff that they are collecting is too low for them to make any meaningful investment. And even if the tariff is at the level it should be, it will take years for the whole country to be electrified. We have to accept that some people will get 24 hours electricity before others.
Quite true. Quite true. Good points. I believe that NEC has actually developed or reviewed the MITO, and the new tariff may come in force by next year. Hopefully, if it's cost reflective, which 90% of all Nigerians are basically hoping it would be, we would have some sort of sanity, brought back into the market. At least let's have something that is some sort of sanity brought back to the market, to the point where we can actually say that we are in adherence with the provisions or obligations of TEN. as it is. Morris, please, let me bring this question to you. Sorry. With regards to the ease of transmission and distribution networks, are you concerned that the lack of access to a section of the value chain, may derail a transaction to an eligible customer? And if yes, what strategies would you propose to mitigate the potential risks that's associated with it?
Well, firstly, you have to distinguish between transmission and distribution, as you say.
Yeah.
I see no difficulty in giving perfect supply to anybody that's transmission connected, right? And TCN, please note, although I've advised TCN in the past, I'm not advising them at present, so I'm not speaking for them. But if you're TCN, one of the things that happened 18 months after the privatization is we put these transmission-connected customers to the discos as customers. The alternate choice was to put them to Rumu at NBET, as it was then. And I wasn't involved closely in that discussion, but I think it was more about pragmatism. Now, from a TCN point of view, they're still billing the supplier, whether it was a trader doing it or whether a disco doing it. What they would like to be doing is billing these eligible customers, transmission connected customers directly for their transmission use of system, not billing through a third party with all the associated payment.
Yeah,
now, this isn't going to solve all their problems. They've still got, for whatever we say about total energy payments, the payments to the transmission company for the services, the percentage payments have been lower by, nearer 20% instead of 35. So that is one aspect. In terms of the distribution side of it, even if we had a really working market, which as you've just said, we don't, even if we had a really working market, it is a war to get connection to customers on a distribution system. Yeah? And as I said, in the past, I've worked both sides of that war. As a consultant, it's good business. Yeah? But it is not, even if you've got all the engineering there, right? You've got a distribution system giving you 100% to the customer. If that customer wants to change, it's still a nightmare. If you're not giving 100% to that customer, the disco's going to say, oh, well, if you want to go to somebody else, you've got to pay for reinforcement so that I can deliver this 100% to you, because I'll be delivering a service that isn't within my current normal service. Yeah? So I'd be taking on extra commitments, probably outside my regulatory environment and back straight into courts. So I'm not willing to do it unless I can reinforce my distribution system in order to deliver 100% to you. Anyway, that's...
Amazing. With respect to these regulations, I see something come out of it. For any investor to make any potential good investment in this sector, that investor would definitely expect a good return on that investment, which means translating to a pass-through cost, since only one person really would pay for services, improvements in services, or even access to a new network, as the case may be, the customer. So in this entire scenario, how has the customer really been taken into consideration, or who is protecting the customer, so that, like Edu inferred, we might not unleash the distribution companies on the customers that are in a position to pay that high amount because they want 100% supply 24/7. Who is really thinking about that end customer? And like Rahila also, I think you alluded to this during the period you're making your point, you have to balance it. You have to make sure as a Nigerian that even the rural areas do have access to electricity. And Edu mentioned that you could actually connect them through the solar grid or upgrade, as the case may be, give them solar home systems. You know, and another thing, as it turns out, we do not have a fully functional market yet. Would a cost-reflective tariff solve that problem so that rather than jump to regulation after regulation and probably try to solve the long-term market-related challenges, we take a step back to actually bring ourselves to that point where we can have a cost-reflective tariff in a fully functional, contract-driven market, so as to probably even start relieving MBET of the pressures of novating over these contracts and let the generation companies sign up directly with the distribution companies. What are your thoughts on that?
Well,
I'm sorry, please, before you get into it, the audience line has been opened, and we can actually start taking questions from the audience or from the floor. Please, if you are also in a position to send us WhatsApp messages or just send us a text message with your questions so that we can try and take as many of them as possible on +234 083 0803 056 6148. Let me repeat the number again. +234 0803 056 6148 for your questions, please. Go ahead, Raila.
okay, so there are a number of things here. When you talk about who should pay for electricity, when we talk about cost-reflective tariffs, now, I totally understand, like many here, that cost-reflective tariffs is important to give the price signals for investments to come in. But we must also not look at that in isolation of our economy. Now, when you sell power, there are only two people that can pay for that power. Either customers pay for it in full, and if they can't, the government have to step in. Now, you alluded earlier to that the minor review that has happened, and next year from January we'll have a cost-reflective tariff. Now, cost-reflective tariff is not going to solve the problem. I mean, if you give me cost-reflective tariff, if I were a disco, you're only making me to have more losses because my customers will just not pay. If I'm only getting 4 hours, I mean, we're in an industry where customers pay based on sentiments. And when I mean sentiments is that if in a month I've only had 5 hours supply and I don't have a meter, and you give me a 20,000 naira bill, if I feel like it, I can give you 2,000. If I'm economically empowered, I can give you 5. If you look at, for example, Ibadan Distribution Company, where it has a number of states, there are 5 states in that franchise area, that the government did not pay the salaries for almost 18 months. I mean, 18 months, they have not been paid a salary. And it's not as if the state government salaries is the best of it, but they have not been paid for 18 months. Now, you cannot isolate that from affordability. So you have to also look at affordability. Now, you also have to look at, okay, if I invest today, what timeline does it take for that investment to show up in improved services? I think there is an over-optimistic view as to how quickly this industry can improve. I said earlier about a small aspect of New Delhi that took them 17 years to get from 53 aggregate losses down to a single digit with the amount of money we talked about. And in India, there was all manner of interventions, all manner of grants, 0% loans. I mean, name it, they had it. Yet, it took them 17 years. So to think that in Nigeria, we think that we can achieve the same thing in 3 or 5 years is a joke. Now, you have in July 2020, next year, a cost-reflective tariff of about an average of 44 naira. And the expectation is that the distribution companies will pay upstream 100%. That is not going to happen. So like Edu was saying to earlier, and I totally agree with him, that if the objective is to take over this discourse, take it. Just take it away from them. Tell them, call them to the table, say to the disco owners that we don't need you guys in this network, we pay you your money, bye-bye. Because next year, by July, nobody is going to be able to pay that. Now, let me bring in the good side to it. So when Edu was talking earlier about, giving power to those people within your distribution network that can afford it, yes, I think that should be the route. But then you can support this with the franchising model. So if you, in Mito today, the energy that is allocated to a disco does not provide 24/7 light. It doesn't. So, and it also has an allowable revenue that is not 100% because it's linked to the energy that is supplied. So what this means is that if a disco has a capped revenue that it can get, linked to the energy that is allowed, that is allocated to it. So let me put numbers. So if you have 400 megawatts that is allocated to you as a disco, and that 400 megawatts, due to the constraints in the network, you have to load shed. The people that Edu is talking about, some will get 24 hours, some will get 20 hours, some will get 17 hours. Now, you can give out the portion, the difference, to other people to come and meet up that supply, and you earn a distribution revenue that is not regulated. With that portion, you can now, invest and focus on those customers that you are happy to provide power to. So I think in a nutshell, what I'm saying here is that cost-reflective tariff is good, but will not solve the problem if it is not properly supported to make it happen. And I think it would be unfair to have customers pay full cost-reflective tariffs when the service has not improved. So it's important to have this balance. It's important that government determines that for 3 years, I'm going to support this industry, but it has to be well structured. And I know that there are some people, that would say that it's privatized, government should not put money, but I'm sorry, the network investment required is so huge that you and I as customers can't pay for it. We should not pay for it. It's something that government must commit to, but it must be within a specified period, not this knee-jerk reaction we have every year. This year we want 700, it comes. This year 600, next year we don't know. It's a knee-jerk reaction. And that's why I said we cannot be saying we are sick and anything we'll be trying. It's not trial and error. It creates more expenses. Thank you.
I can see quite some interest coming from the floor. Please, we are open to questions.
Or two. The very first thing is that I tend to agree with Rahila and Edu about the commercial financial issues regarding the industry, about regulation. But I fear that when I hear Rahila talk, it seems like as if the discos made no commitments coming in here, So you're absolving them of the things. They also said that they will reduce this with this rate. So all of a sudden they get in and say, we can't do it. And then we should just accept it. I think that carving out responsibilities for them for the promises they made, it's not a very right way to go about this. So that is first an observation. But when it comes to franchising, I think that on the issue of franchising, one of the things we've seen about regulations is they tend to come as if they're adversarial to disco positions, instead of actually trying to create an enablement for the market. So the franchising, if you do it very right, just like it's talked, like a tariff jurisdiction that says this is what we're going to do and this is the level of service and this is how much people we pay, then discos might take that on or invite third parties to join them instead of making it seem like the franchising is based on discos, you can't do it, we must get people in there, right? It should be in a way that it helps financing. So it's just an observation about that, and I just wanted to leave it to that.
Let me say something. For me also, I totally agree with you that discos should not be riding on at the back of, no, everything is government, and that's what they've been doing. Government has not done its part. They made commitments. And that's why for me, I'm actually against that word or that statement, cost-reflective tariff. What is cost-reflective tariff? It depends. Some years back, I asked one of the discos, I said, if you are allowed to charge your customers what they're willing to pay, will you do that? He said, no. I said, so what is the tariff you want? You want NERC to set tariff? Because they just want to have a tariff set by NERC, and then they'll say we can't collect. We keep going through the motion all along. I look at it that discos, we should also recognize that there are businesses. If Dangote manufactures 100,000 bags of cement today, and for some reason he can't sell, he doesn't call the government and say, hey, come and pay me for the one I couldn't sell. I mean, I hope so. you know, so that's the same thing. The business owners of the discos took a risk. And that's why I still go back to, when we talk of cost-reflective tariff, one thing should actually be clear there, is simply the cost of power, where the government will say, look at the cost I am going to sell power to you. Disco, charge your customers what they're willing to pay, but pay your bill. It's very simple. I mean, that's how we run our businesses in our homes. You pay your suppliers, then based on what you paid your suppliers, you now charge your customers something. And yes, I also understand that power is a social commodity. So as a social commodity, you can't just charge whatever ridiculous level. But let's understand one thing for customers. What is the alternative? Diesel generator.
Yeah.
That is actually the main supplier of power in the country for most households. Right. So if they charge you more than the cost of you using a diesel generator, you probably tell them, okay, let me just cut off. Let me concentrate on my diesel generator. And the government, and what Rahila said is quite correct. The government, the reality is that even in UK, even in all these advanced countries, you see subsidized. Now, the problem with Nigeria is that we don't have data to say, how do I subsidize Mr. A, who is a poor man, and not Mr. B? But it's something you can think of. I mean, simply because if discos, they want to give, say, 2 hours electricity to Maitama, there are people that are earning $1 million every month in Maitama. There are people that are only earning 20,000.
Quite true.
So, and the thing about power is not like GSM where you can put a mast. This one, you're wrong cable. So it's very simple. Typical poor family, what do they have? They have 3 light bulbs, a TV, a fan. Maybe they use 3 kilowatt hours a day. Government can actually say, for all your customers, the first 3 kilowatt hours, charge them 20 naira. I subsidize it. But once they go more than 3 kilowatt hours, charge them what they are ready to pay. They just pay your bill back to government. And then all of a sudden, you start creating that market where they take their business risk. And if it doesn't work out, if their customers don't pay, it is their risk. And if they don't pay their bills, then you can bankrupt them. That's the thing. It should be give and take for them. Yeah. But what is happening today is that everybody, they ride on this cost-reflective tariff. The reality is that this tariff you've seen now, by July next year, these schools are going to come out again and look at one number and say, it's still not cost-reflective. So we can't. That's what is going to
Quite true. Please, let's take our questions.
I've got a question for the regulative representative. He spoke first earlier, actually. So my question is, why do you think it's necessary that a country like Nigeria needs to start working with a trial and error-based system when energy and electricity industry is quite sensitive? If my grandmother was talking about how NEPA, they were fixing it, I came, they're still fixing it. Aren't we tired of having those conversations? So if we're not moving forward, and if you're suggesting we should try trial and error, why would you keep using that as an option in a country like Nigeria in 2019?
Good point. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for your question. Let me restate that I'm a lawyer first, before being a regulator. I don't think I said trial and error. Maybe you had trial and error somewhere, not from me. Is that right? Did you hear I said trial and error? So it's an innuendo. Take it aside. What I said that the primary objective of NEC is to ensure access to electricity. For all these years, since I joined the sector over 25 years ago, it's the same problem we have been discussing at every meeting. Access. What are the options? We try options 1. We see that it is not working very well. Let us try the other options. So it's options that we are trying. It's not trial and error. And yes, it's options. It's not, when you say error, it's like the other one you don't know about it. Let me tell you, again, these regulations that we are churning out, there's a rule-making process. We cannot come, the regulator will not come out with a regulation without following this rule-making process. There has to be consultation. There has to be responses. We review the responses. If there's overwhelming support for that regulation, we go out and issue the regulation. We just don't wake up early in the morning and say, it's not a decree, it's a regulation. It's not a decree. It's not a military decree. So, this franchising regulation that is in the process, what we are saying, we have gone around, don't they consult? I'm surprised when I discuss with some people here, they are not even aware that we have gone around. When I came in, we had side discussion with some people. They just don't know that we have gone out to do this consultation. So what I'm saying, if there's a consultation, if you are in this sector, you are an investor or you have an interest in this sector, you have to be following of what is happening. If we want to do anything, we advertise, we put the consultation paper, we go around, we review all your submissions. If overwhelming majority say, okay, go ahead, we go. We have other regulations that we mooted that it's not on, like mergers of companies. We have a lot of them that people indicated that is not right, we go ahead with this. We keep them, so you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know. So these regulations are with the major support of those that are interested in the sector. We don't wake up early in the morning and say this is a regulation. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Emmanuel Chukwu from the Federal Ministry of Power. I just want to take them on the issue of this stranded power. They did not give us a way out, because when you talk of eligible customer, the essence of eligible customer is to ensure that the stranded 2,000 megawatts is used somehow. And also because some industries have problem of power. And what eligible customer is aimed at doing is to get them in clusters, get power to them, improve employment, and also reduce the price of commodities. So when you are talking of why eligible customer, what should happen to the 2,000 megawatts stranded power? Should we just allow it to flow? So that's the essence, please. Thank you.
My name is Mojid Kolaole Omolaja. I'm actually a student of University of Abuja because I overheard somebody mention Igwalada. And as our voice is a voice for the voiceless, our voice is the emancipative voice of Nigerian students. With due respect, sir, I have a simple question and very, very fundamental. In a situation whereby we are still suffering from epileptic power supply on our various campuses, and we are seeing crime rate is geometrically increasing. When there is no light to study, there is no light to do your assignments, and we have so many means, clubbing, drinking alcohol, as a student, because you don't have light to study. It's so unfortunate. So what do we expect the son and daughter of the less privileged to do? Because they don't have the fundamental financial support. So please, my question is, how do you intend to use this opportunity to enhance the level of power supply in our various campuses to promote so that we have physics students and we have engineering students? You can channel them, you can engage them. That's how China go. Please, you can do something. Thank you very much.
My name is Solomon Soja, and my question goes to Mr. Idu. I believe every business that is consistent would eventually earn the trust of customers to pay whatsoever is requested if they feel value, if they get the value they are paying for. My question is, why is it that at this point we can't get used to a pattern? We can't get power, let's say, we know, for instance, that from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. we have power. And from there, we can start developing trust for the disco that if they tell us, pay 100 kilowatts per hour, and then in 5 years' time, you start paying 20 kilowatts, we can trust that, okay, they mean business, they are serious. Why can't we get a fixed time, even though it will not be 24 hours? Do you understand?
Yeah, my name is Adeolu Taiwo. I'm just going like a comment also and maybe a question at the end of the day. I want to speak regarding the cost-reflective tariff. I used to hear about that a lot of time. And what comes to my mind is AT&C losses. What is the collection rate of the disco? If the disco is to collect 100%, it's collecting less than 20 or 30%. Is he increasing the cost that will make him collect 70%? I don't think that would happen. Those are part of why, when they say cost reflective, yes, we know there's a shortfall. But the point is the disco really collecting enough or remitting enough? If we can't have these questions solved, these challenges will still remain. Again, I have this thought again regarding tariff system. We need to also determine our class of tariff. How? We have residential, we have commercial. What is critical now, based on our economic situation? We need more production. What is the cost at our production side? That is for the commercial. What is the cost at resident? To my own opinion, why can't we make sure the price for commercial is a bit lower, competitive a bit, and increase that for resident? Because it's when you have been able to work or get something doing, you can have money to be able to go home to enjoy that electricity itself. Now, so if we could do that, it's going, because all we're talking at the end of the day is we're looking at how to ensure that people have steady electricity supply and people are able to invest. And if our commercial activities is increasing, because power is one of the major problems affecting production, I think that will go a long way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Distribution.
Good evening. St. Jerome Onwegluchi, Novena Group. My question is a bit simple. The power providers have all been hounding the issues of not having enough profit margins. And I mean, I run factories and I need to get a transformer. I just bought a transformer for a rice mill somewhere in Benue. Now, my own suggestion or opinion is that instead of always talking about not generating enough revenue for your outlay, for your investment, why don't you sit down, do the maths, and capture more of the industries? Okay, where I am in Benue, I'm going now to start providing power to the host community as part of my CSR, so that at least nobody attacks my factory, nobody kidnaps me. Okay, so that's CSR. But if, I don't know who's in Benue, who's in Makodi, if it's here, but I mean, if you had more of those responses for high consumers like us, okay, then you will have the tariffs. We will pay the tariffs instead of running generators. And then we have about, arguably about 12 hours of daylight, okay, intense sunlight that you can harness for alternative sources of energy. We have gas, where I am in Enugu, behind Amabrui. I'm sitting on Ajali, and it can support a turbine for the factories we wanted to do at Premier Cashew. So we didn't get any responses from the local providers. We ended up talking to General Electric. So I think, and with due respect, you've done a lot of work, but there's still a lot more that you need to do to rein in the revenue that is a bit not captured, okay, apart from metering. Thank you.
Okay. So Rumu, my dearest friend, I knew that comment was going to come from you, because that has always been your position about why is it that, I mean, you're trying to let go disco, trying to let discos off the hook. Now, I totally agree with you that there is a contractual obligation on the distribution companies to fulfill. Now, I'm not here as their spokesperson, even if I consult for most of them. Now, the important thing to say here when you talk about the distribution business is that I think there's a lack of knowledge as to how, one, the transaction, the privatization transaction was designed. There's a lack of knowledge in what those contracts speak to. So the PPAs, the vesting contracts, the shareholders agreement, the performance agreement, all these agreements are on the table with different obligations on both sides of the parties that signed on to it. Now, yes, when the distribution investors came, they were supposed to bring equity. They were supposed to invest a portion of that in the network. But obviously, I don't want to get into historical issues because we can sleep here on that. But I think the question I want to leave with you is that if the government feels that the distribution companies have not fulfilled their obligation, why have they not exercised the call option? Why have they not done that? If you have given out your assets, if you have sold to someone and the person has not performed, there are clauses in the agreement that are triggered. So my question to you and for government to think about or to answer is that if you are saying that the distribution companies should not be let off the hook, and I'm not advocating that, but I'm speaking to the other side of the coin. Why has the government not triggered their side of the performance agreement, which is a call option, saying, you guys have messed up, you've not done it, I call you. Why haven't they done that? There are reasons for that. The other question I want to leave with you, another comment I want to leave with you is this. In the recent minor review order that was done, there was an acceptance by government that in 2017 and 2018, and the regulator here can, corroborate that there was a mutual non-performance by both sides, so the operators and government. So there's a non-mutual performance. What does that mean? What does that constitute? So it's telling me something, that on both sides, they have erred. So I don't think, each time you go for conferences or talk shops or something, we keep talking about the issues. I think the issues are all out there. And I think for some, it's well understood. We need to progress. We need to move and try to get things right. So I want to say that I agree with you. Yes, you shouldn't let them off the hook, but it is important that in a market such as this that is not working, if there's no captain, clear captain, if there's no clear vision, there's no clear direction, there's no one voice, people will take advantage of it and not do what they're supposed to do. So I think that is one singular issue in this sector. You have many captains. We don't know where we are headed. So in that kind of jungle market, people are not obligated to meet their performance. They don't really care because you go here, they say something else. You go to another person, they say something else. Nobody cares. They just, do whatever they can do. That is what is happening without me putting, details to it. Then the gentleman from the Ministry of Power, you talked about stranded power.
Yeah.
I think he stepped out.
Yeah.
Okay, you talked about, I think the former minister, Fashola's 2,000 megawatts. That he kept talking about not being distributed. Now I don't know what basis or what facts or any empirical evidence to show that. We need to offload what we even have. So when he says, how do you offload the stranded power, it's not eligible customers that will solve it. You should not forget that there are contracts that must be held, although we don't have a contract market. Myself and Edu were talking about it earlier, that we keep talking about contracts. There's no contract. There's nobody upholding it. There's no sanctity of contracts in this market. But it's important that there is an acknowledgement of it, that we're no longer going by contracts. If we say we're no longer going by contracts, then fine. But today, you have 2 contracts for energy, power purchase agreements and the vesting contracts. They are vested quantities that you cannot change unless it's mutual conversation. Yeah. So if you are saying there's 2,000 megawatts and it should go to eligible customers, on what basis, from who and from where, who is authorizing it, what DISCO is on the table, what GENCO is on the table. So it's not just talking about offloading. You have to look at the commercial side and before you start looking at the wires. But we tend to look at things in silos in this sector, and the sector can be solved in silos. Even if you have different owners, the sector must work in an integrated fashion. Yeah. Yeah. And like Edu alluded to earlier, the distribution is the neck of the industry. If the neck is poor, the entire value chain is poor. So we need to address that. So in terms of how you offload 2,000 megawatts, I think an integral part of this whole issue is, I believe Maurice can even speak to that, is this integrated systems planning. Where today you have transmission company, and I'm not blaming anyone, you are making your investments that are not aligned with the load. So if the investments at TCN are not aligned with the load, there will be stranded power. So there must be a recognition by the Ministry of Power that there is somebody somewhere, and I know ESO does it, in terms of saying, how do we plan this value chain? What is the load? If the load is 10,000 megawatts, what is the investment required at TCN level to make it happen before we begin to procure? But what is happening today is that TCN has an investment plan and is running with it. It's good and fine. But if you put transformation capacity where I don't have load, and where my customers there pay me 4 naira, I'm not going to take it. It's going to be a huge loss. So I think one thing that can solve this stranded power thing is a clear alignment of investment across the value chain. TCN, DISCOs must sit and have a handshake and say that this is where my load is. TCN, I would like you to put your investments here to unblock any stranded power. So I think that's one place that a lot of focus, and I understand that at NERC earlier this week that there was a training around integrated planning system. But again, there needs to be a focus there. If there's a focus there, a lot of issues will be solved. Then the last point I wanted to make is around this issue of cost-reflective tariffs. Somebody mentioned it down here that, and the person was talking about ATC and C losses. Now, ATC and C losses is simply this. For every 1 naira kilowatt I sell, there's a certain amount I'm not collecting, and that is a fact. Now, the problem that we're having with tariffs today is that certain assumptions in tariffs do not match with the reality. Now, if you, as a regulator, is saying to me that I am collecting more revenue than I'm actually collecting, and you are basing all my key performance indicators on it, then I'm going to default. I will not meet those targets. So in a nutshell, I think rather than us acting like an ostrich, it's important that everyone in this sector comes to the reality and say, what should be done? What needs to go into tariffs? What has been happening over the past years is that government or regulator or whoever determines that customers can only pay 30 naira on average, and then you walk it back. What energy will fit 30 naira? What ATC and C loss will allow 30 naira? No, it should be the other way around. You should put everything that is required into the basket and let it generate a tariff. If that tariff is 100 naira per kilowatt, the next question is, how much should the customers reasonably pay for? And who should pay the balance? And how should the balance be paid? And over what period? So, I'm not advocating that cost-reflective tariffs will solve everything, but it's a combination of a number of factors that is at play. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rahila.
I'm just going to, let me go back to the ministry. You know, I like when government officials always throw numbers out, you know, in terms of stranded power, 2,000 megawatts, and the eligible customer regulation is supposed to move that stranded power. Then the question I've asked is, so since we started talking about eligible customer, have we seen anybody build a transmission line from a GENCO to those customers? Because as long as they are using the same lines today and they are not getting power, so is it once you sign the eligible customer, then one magic now comes and starts injecting power into that line? That's the thing. Eligible customers, as far as I'm concerned, is simply who is going to collect the money. And MBET is right that if you actually want to do it, MBET should collect the money. And what NBET has said, which I totally support, is very simple. If you, as a GENCO, you are contracted 300 megawatts to me, you don't just, when they will your power to this customer, you say it's stranded asset. No, you first of all inject 300 megawatts to the grid. Then the remaining, that's the one you call eligible customer. That's why it has not worked. Because TCN has not invested in a single cable to make that thing possible. So there is the stranded power we have today is simply because what Rahila said, there is a very big mismatch between distribution infrastructure and the transmission infrastructure. And that's what it should be. That's where we should be focusing. Those customers that are already connected to the grid, that they are not being served today, it has nothing to do with the discos. It has to do with, if discos have power in that area, they will give them power. If TCN shares load, if there is no power coming to that area, TCN will just, the disco will disconnect them. And that's why you now, those people complain, and then you are now talking of eligible customer. So what we should be doing is, I don't know why we don't have like a monthly meeting, planning meeting between TCN and the discos. Like I said again, it's very simple. When I was talking about, say, you want to start with Maitama, the only way you can assure Maitama people that you're going to give them power 22 hours is that you are going to do an enumeration of all the customers in Maitama. You know the load they require, both peak and off-peak. Yeah. Then you are going to check all the substations, both transmission substation and distribution substation, and make sure that they are there. And then you can now account. That's why I say you can't give 24 hours. You can account for that one-off total grid collapse where you can't do anything about it. But that's what you have to. So DISCO should be going to TCN and now saying, TCN, in 6 months, we expect to give Guarempa area 24 hours electricity. Look at the number of customers there. Look at the load we require in Guarempa. Based on the infrastructure you have today, can you transmit? If TCN says no, it will take us 9 months. DISCO will be very, they will be deceiving the market if they go to that Guarempa and say we can give you in 6 months. They should work with TCN and say, so in 9 months, if we do our job and TCN does his job, we can give this area that power. That's the way it should be. So the former minister, I like the buzzword he kept throwing around because we needed to get the regulation out. But at the end of the day, it has not solved any problem. Now, and that goes to the question the gentleman there asked in terms of fixed time. The reason the DISCO will never tell you when you're going to get power is that it's not under their control. That's the long and short story of it. They might tell you we are going to give you power from 12 to 6. And by 1 o'clock, TCN will just cut off power to that area. What are they going to do? That's the thing. That's the reason why it cannot happen. Now, again, I believe that power comes to the distribution. If you have a distribution infrastructure in this area and power is continuously on that power, then the DISCO can now say, okay, for this area, these people, I am giving them 24 hours. These ones, I'm going to give 10 hours. And I can distribute based on my load something. That's the only time they can plan. But as long as it's happening today, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to blame TCN totally on this, because DISCOs are actually guilty in the sense of it. Now, I run a power plant, and if you ask me to say drop from maybe 120 megawatts to 50 megawatts, it's going to take me like 10 minutes to do that. Okay? We watch the screen like hawk. The thing about DISCO, in fact, rainy season is just for the sky to turn blue. All of a sudden, bah! Their own is just to go to the feeder and just, bah, bah! It's just the way you change your generator. And all of a sudden, TCN, what you just see is the frequency spike immediately, because that load, unfortunately, the thing about power is that once you're generating the power, it must go somewhere. So, frequency spikes. So, everybody's guilty of it. And that's why also, it has to go down that if the DISCO, now, the way it should be working is that DISCO, just like us today, as a generator, every morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, we tell the National Control Center, look at the power we are going to put on the grid tomorrow. Yeah. That's the way it works. Based on the circumstances, because my gas supplier is telling me that I have enough gas, I don't plan any maintenance So I will tell them 24 hours before, I will tell them, look at the quantity of power I'm going to put on the grid. The way it should work is also, DISCO should be telling TCN, should be telling the National Control Center, for tomorrow, look at the load I need. And if the DISCO doesn't take that load when they've nominated it, they should compensate. That's how the market works.
Quite true. Quite true.
Balance it.
Quite true.
Yes.
You have a question? Please.
Rahila, you talked about when we've put together the total cost of power, and then we agree on a tariff, and then we make a decision on whether who can pay or not pay. So that's be the next question. I was wondering if you think, and I think Edu also alluded to that, if it would make sense to actually say, this is the cost of power, and this is the number of hours of electricity it should guarantee a customer. Because Edu has just said that TCN cannot tell you how many hours, then what is the consumer getting? What exactly why should any consumer bring out money and put a budget to pay for electricity if he does not know when power will be available to him, whether it's 2 hours or 4 hours a day?
In quite a few countries I've worked in, I've taken an example, Kosovo. They've improved now, but when I was last working there, they were significantly short of power in the middle of winter, right? And they did two things. One, they put metering on all their 11 kV feeders at the top of the meter, top of the feeder, and they compared that with the amount of payment by the customers being supplied by that meter. So they categorized all the customers into 3 classes. And during the worst of the winter, the worst class would get 4 hours a day, the next best would get 8, and the best class would get 12. And then during the rest of the year, much more, and in summer, pretty well 24 for everyone. But the big thing they did is they published in the newspapers every day who was on from which hours. Not this random, I don't know when it's coming on tomorrow or not. Yeah? This is, coordination between NERC, ministry, the system operator, and newspapers and discos. Hey, other countries do it. Why aren't we doing it? If you're running a business in a country that's short of electricity, and you know exactly which hours of the day you're going to have electricity tomorrow, you manage it so that your workers come in. I remember the 3-day week back in the UK when different parts of each disco would be on for different parts because we were short of coal. And, you came into work for 3 days and you messed around for the other 3. But, it's something we should have done years ago. And we're not alone in this. Every other African country I've worked in has the same problem. That they're not as short of electricity as we are. Okay, could I actually come in on a couple? Sorry. Couple of, it's not the answering the questions, but
yes.
It points Rahila and Edu made.
Yes.
Rahila, you talked about franchising approach not working because people won't invest. I was just over at NERC. We've got a International Regulators Conference on. And I met with a colleague from Turkey who's with the ministry there, right? And this was one of the things we talked. They do franchise, they had to franchise the discos in Turkey because the government, their constitutional court said it was evil and wrong to sell off discos. They're the property of the people of the country and mustn't be sold. So they ended up franchising them. So what did they do? They put them out on 50-year franchises. And if I've got a 50-year franchise for a disco and most of that equipment's going to wear out in 20 to 30 years, then I'll invest. It's no different. Our problem here is we do 10 and 20-year franchises. Yeah, very short. That's where that goes wrong. Edu, you talked about subsidies in England or UK. Now, while those subsidies are internal within an industry, I'm not too unhappy with them.
right? I may disagree with the purpose of the subsidy, etc., but I'm not too unhappy. But if the subsidies are between tax and the industry, that means instead of me paying for electricity, I pay twice as much money through the tax man because the government's going to take 100% administrative charge on doing it, right? Here in Nigeria, because of oil, we think about things slightly differently, yeah? But if we're in a country where it's electricity or tax, I want to pay the full cost in my electricity, and I want to pay it for every single product I'm buying, right? Rahila, this whole subject of coordination between distribution companies and transmission companies, again, it isn't just here. Most of the developing world have this problem. And both sides are at fault. You know, planning should be bottom up. Yeah. It should come from local government talking to DISCO, talking about your actual development plans, and those plans then feeding into the DISCO's plans and coming up through transmission to generation up there. Now, you made a good point here because it being on ISAP, part of the problem here is it's much more done on the grid code and grid code review panel planning sits, but that's just a technical aspect of planning. It's not the commercial management of who wants electricity where, which is more of an ISAP type issue.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask Morris, what is the way forward? We've heard a lot. It sounds gloomy because of where we seem to have found ourselves today. Definitely, we need to take a step back to actually start integrating some of the positive points that we've heard into our everyday electricity consumption.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be positive. I consider this the Nigerian miracle. Every other country I've worked in, we would have hit the wall 2 to 3 years ago. Somehow in this country, we keep going, we keep going. We're going to hit the wall sooner or later, and the longer you put it off, the worse it's going to be. I don't see any good answers.
Well, this is about the 6th time I'm coming here to listen to dialogue here, this power dialogue. And each time I'm coming in here, I see a big generator downstairs sounding, giving power here, and we're discussing power. Well, I don't know whether AEDC knows there's a place like this that exists to give them power. And this is Wuse 2, a Highbrow area, where people are willing to pay for power. Why do they depend on alternative power supply, like generators, to get power? Does it mean that the distribution company, that's AEDC in charge of this area, do not know that a place like this exists? Do they need more regulation? Is it a problem of inefficiency that is making them not getting the amount of resources they need to get from their customers?
Sorry, I didn't really hear the question.
Why
can you recap?
Why is their generator constantly on, especially during this program and in Wuse 2?
It's load shedding. It's just load shedding, and there's
Is AEDC not aware of a place like this?
Maybe they have not been informed. So I think Nextier needs to do some work there.
I mean, one thing for certain is that for the Nextier team, you wouldn't want an interruption during the program. And they wouldn't run that risk as well. So we'd probably rely on their generator, especially for these 3 hours that the program is supposed to be on, before moving back to supply from the grid itself. I can't think of another answer. They have to also protect what they are doing or ensure that this level of professionalism that is brought to the dialogue, power dialogue, is maintained. That's the only thing I can think of that should probably respond to that question. Having said that, we actually have taken a lot from the program. We hope that the industry administrators mostly are listening. It doesn't just fall on NEC to take on most of these tasks as it is. No. The MO, the ISO, TCN, the ministry all have a part to play. Let us find a way to actually integrate the systems planning across board, not just on the technical side of things, but also on the commercial. It's actually very important. let's start pushing out that information so that people can actually be guaranteed a specific amount of supply within the 24-hour range every day. I mean, if I'm aware that I would only have power probably between 12 noon to 6 p.m., I would have done everything I could do with that power coming from the grid because it's actually the cheapest source of electricity I would get. I'll do everything and plan my activities within that duration of time that relies on electricity. Then I might also go out for my business during the time that I'm off the network as it is, or I do not have supply. You know, it's not a long road. I mean, it's all about thinking outside the box and finding a way of integrating this process into our everyday electricity consumption, production to consumption, and how best to probably integrate the generation guys to meet the demands of the consumers. It's something that we should actually start thinking about for the long term. Somebody should actually take this initiative and run with it. I mean, quite a number of people are already pushing that information out there to keep us informed on a daily basis of how much energy is on the grid. Some others would actually keep us informed on probably about 50% of the actual consumption going into any home in Nigeria, probably coming from generators. So as much as we're discussing how to resolve the grid-related consumption and the market challenges, some other people are doing big business on the side by importing generators and selling it to us on a daily basis. How do you bridge that gap to ensure that at least Nigerians are guaranteed a certain amount of energy from the grid that is affordable and reliable? The Nextier team would have something to probably add to this when the time comes and everything, but those are the talking points for tomorrow. And we shouldn't let this conversation just die down today. It's something that we should all go back home with and probably find a way to initiate that conversation to start taking place. With that, I think we have come to a very good position to end this conversation for the night. You know, so please, my dear, you can take it from here.
Mr. Moderator. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to make use of this opportunity to say thank you for being here today. Thank you for joining the discussions. Thank you for your thoughtful contributions. Thank you for your insightful questions. To the panel, I must say thank you for being completely and totally honest. That is what is required. It's true that we are living here with more questions than answers, but then it's a good thing because we get to go back and think. The regulator gets to go back and think, are these regulations we are working on actually the right thing to be doing at this time? It's very important. That being said, the next dialogue is going to be coming up on the 11th of next month, of December. And it's going to be earlier than usual so that we can allow people to go to their villages for Christmas when it's time. So, exactly. So please look out for more information through the Nigeria Electricity Hub. We will continue reaching out to you. We will continue making our calls. We will continue sending our emails to you so that you're never left in the dark. So thank you. Have a wonderful night rest.